Welcome. As we did in the previous course, Introduction to Food Law, I want to take a brief moment to pause as we get ready for more substantive discussion board and we get ready for writing written assignments to cover expectations again. What am I looking for when grading? What do I expect you to be producing both in discussion boards and written assignments? And a little bit different than what we did in RFA 6130, Introduction to Food Law. We're going to go through something called IRAC, Issue, Rule, Analysis, Conclusion. So I'm expecting you, when you're going through these writing assignments, to identify the issue. For example, is it a food additive? Is it a food? Is it a color additive? All of those topics we're talking about are potential issues, and of course within those are additional sub-issues that we can look at. Once we've identified the issue, what is the rule that aids in defining or providing the criteria, the regulatory standard, whatever it is that answers that issue? What is that rule? Then we're applying the analysis. It's 1 plus 1 equals, and that's what we're doing here. Issue plus rule, we put that together, that's our analysis. How does the rule apply to our particular issue? Is it dispositive? Is it informative? Is it persuasive? All of those things are going in and we're figuring out our analysis. From that, we're reaching a conclusion. So our issue or rule led us to this analysis. Our analysis, we put it in the blender. We come out with what we believe is an interpretation of the regulation of the statute that informs us about this conclusion. We're doing that every time. So it's not this global conclusion, this global issue. We're looking at this fact pattern. We're looking at this discussion board and we're saying, okay, here's issue 1, here's issue 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number of issues there are, rank them in importance, how much time you want to spend on each one. Remember, we're being concise, we're being very short in our written material, and so we've got to rank them. Which ones do we really want to talk about? Which ones do we just want to mention, hey, this could be a potential consideration? So you're doing that IRAC, that issue rule analysis for each issue. So you're going to have a bunch of IRACs that you're working with. And of course, we're emphasizing citations throughout the program, and here in this course, no exception. We'll have a couple of slides I'll just briefly go over because they're the same that we had in the previous course about how to properly cite to CFRs, to the statute, to final rules, interim rules, all of that stuff, but proper citation is important. So this is the analytical model that I want you to use in discussion boards, in written assignments, and it's called IRAC. IRAC, Issue, Rule, Analysis, Conclusion. In the discussion boards, this will be rather straightforward because I'm going to give you the issue. Is Gross broken? For example, will be a discussion board issue. And there it is. Step 1 already done. You have the issue. Now you're going to look for a rule. You're going to look for some standard that helps you answer that question. Go through an analysis, reach a conclusion. In the written assignments, the graded assignments, those are different. I've created fact patterns. You're familiar with my fact patterns by this point. There's some red herrings, some non-issues in there. There's some big issues, some minor issues. It's your job to identify the issues. I'm not doing that for you like I do in discussion boards. So you've got to identify the issue, give me the rule, give me the analysis, give me the conclusion, and do it in a way that is smart so that you get the points for the big issues I'm looking for, and you know, if there's a smaller issue, maybe it's some bonus points, and then that's saved for later rather than missing a bigger issue. These slides are going to look familiar. Citing a statute, provide the example. Citing a case, if necessary, provide the case citation. This is all following the Blue Book citation model. Citing a CFR, we have different options if we're in a final rule versus a proposed rule. Citing a guidance document. In discussion boards, of course, there's going to be some additional material that comes in, some popular media, maybe some consumer updates from the FDA. A lot of different sources come into the discussion board, but for our purposes on graded assignments, keep those to an absolute minimum. If it really helps with what you're doing, bring it in, but otherwise, I'm looking for statutes, CFRs, guidance documents, less so in our case, but it's still possible to have our cases that describe, maybe for example, you want to cite to a Monsanto case that talks about how the FDA has authority to create de minimis exceptions. That's fine, and there may be some other examples like that, but that's primarily what I'm looking for in the written assignments is not as much on the popular media or the soft sources. I'm really looking for the hard sources. And of course, keeping in mind that ranking, and we've talked about this in the previous course, Introduction to Food Law, that ranking of sources of material, statute being the most authoritative, a draft guidance document being the least persuasive. So be mindful of that, and be mindful of that hierarchy. And if you need to go back to your notes from Introduction to Food Law, I encourage you to do that. There may be some other reasons that you need to go back to your notes, as we'll discuss, but that hierarchy is something to refresh yourself on. So our last slide here, what am I expecting? We have our first written graded assignment coming up. I've already given you the analytical model. And again, my emphasis in my courses is to make this as practical as possible. These may be questions that you get in your facility, in your role, in a role that you're hoping to grow into. So these are meant to be practical. And so always start with the basics, because I think you avoid a lot of errors when you start with the basics. And I'm talking about the very basics. Reach back into Introduction to Food Law course. Find some of your notes there. I've mentioned, as we've done these lectures, we always have that first slide that talks about why are we in GROS? Why are we in the food additive? Why are we in color additive? And we always start by saying, okay, the Food and Drug Act applies because we have a component of food, a potentially added adulterant, potential food additive or potential color additive, whichever it is. And we start with those basics. We may not want to spend a lot of time on those because we have bigger issues, bigger pieces of the analysis to conduct. But we want to make sure that we're not just throwing the reader in and just saying, yeah, we're in the food additive amendment and here's an exemption and here's a statutory criteria. Lay that breadcrumbs down, and if you need to, go back to your notes from the RFA 6130 course to get some of those basics that we talked about, definitions of adulteration, prohibited acts, definitions of food and dietary supplements, all of those very basics. I'm expecting you, having taken that course, to be carrying that knowledge and not have to devote a lecture to it, but just that you're going to have that in your memory banks, and you're going to be able to apply that now in the new course. As I've always stressed, concise writing, correct identification of the issues, proper citation, proper rule. You're applying the food additive amendment to a food additive. You're not applying a color additive criteria to it. So those sort of things are important. Be very thoughtful in your analysis. It's often, for me, not as important about what conclusion you reach, but whether or not you properly identified the issue, you properly cited the rule, you found the right rule, and you've given it some thought. You may not have maybe reached a conclusion that I would reach, but that's not necessarily important. I just want you to be able to identify the issue. I want you to be able to know what rule or statutory criteria applies to that particular issue, and to see that you're engaging in that analysis. And of course, always concise. And what I will do for each assignment is there will be more information, and it will provide a page count for you. So that'll give you a better sense of what I mean by concise, in addition to the general meaning here. Again, our audience is management, it's regulatory, it could potentially be the FDA. In other words, it needs to be professional. Professional voice, professional structure, organization. It's one of those things that you want to make sure that you're proud that you can show it to a boss, you can show it in an interview, you can feel confident that that could go in front of any set of eyes and it reflects well upon you. So I'll let you know in the grading in the first assignment, and then you can start to improve. But try your best in this first writing assignment to use a very professional voice. And again, this is for the written graded assignments. Discussion boards, I'm a little more relaxed. It's okay. We're in an informal discussion, community board type setting. That's a little different. When we get to the written graded assignments, I need you to be 100% professional. This is losing the ums, the likes, proper sentence structure. All of that's going to apply. One of the things that I'm learning as we go through this course and grading more assignments, both in the Introduction to Food Law course and this course, is we know so much about food law. We come from regulatory backgrounds, we come from consumer backgrounds, and we have a lot of food facts in our head. And it's especially true now that we have the Food Safety Modernization Act being promulgated. We have all the rules out now. We have comments on the rules. We're getting close to finalizing the rules. FSMA plays big in our minds. And you'll notice in our lectures, we're really not focused on FSMA. FSMA did a lot of things on the enforcement side, but here on the pre-market side for key submissions, not as much. So we're not talking about FSMA, and we're not talking about some other topics. So if you see, when I write these fact patterns, I'm human and I have that food knowledge in the back of my head. So I may be touching on those issues unintentionally. But if you see that and it feels like it's an issue and it's outside of the scope of what we've been talking about, feel free to identify it and say, I see this particular fact and it raises this particular issue and potentially here, but because we're focused on key submissions, no additional analysis. Feel free to do that. Don't dedicate a lot of space because we're going to have page requirements and I'm grading you on being concise. But just know that that could happen and it's unintentional. It's just something that happens when we're writing fact patterns and writing these hypotheticals. So look at your syllabus. That's going to really inform you about what we're covering and what the expectation is in terms of topics, and keep it tightly to those topics. And we'll mention for the most part in our lectures the relevant regulations, guidance documents, and statutes. So if there's something that we haven't covered that could be applicable, let me know, but again, don't dedicate a lot of time to it. So hopefully that gives you a really good sense about expectations, about writing and grading, course for each assignment, how it's graded. The rubric will be provided with the assignment, and as well as the page count, so you'll have more information there. But this will generally tell you what I'm expecting in discussion boards, and in particular what I'm requiring for written graded assignments. I'm always happy to answer questions. I'm always happy to help you find resources if you feel like writing is an issue for you, or if you want more information about the Iraq analytical model. Anything that I can do, I'm happy to set you up for success. And that will be our expectations video.